A former military police officer crossed the same old bridge every morning, until he noticed a tiny German shepherd puppy sitting beneath it in the cold mist, not barking, not hiding, not begging anyone to save him, just waiting. For 7 days, the puppy stayed in the same spot under Mossback Bridge, staring at the road as if someone it loved had disappeared into the rain and promised to come back. People thought he was lost. A little girl had been secretly feeding him. An old woman had been watching from behind her curtains, but no one knew why that tiny puppy refused to leave. Then Alden Mercer stepped beneath the bridge with food, a rescue crate, and a heart still carrying the ghost of the canine partner he had buried years ago. The starving puppy ate immediately, but when Alden tried to take him away, he froze. He would not move. He would not leave the bridge. Until Alden's sleeve slipped back, revealing an old leather bracelet made from the collar of Briggs, his dead canine partner. The puppy stopped breathing for a moment. Then he walked straight toward Alden, pressed his nose against the bracelet, and refused to look away. What did that puppy recognize? Why had he been waiting beneath that bridge for an entire week? And what terrible secret was still hiding in the rain, just beyond Mossback Bridge? What Alden found next would lead him to a missing mother dog, a gray van no one wanted to remember, and a second chance he never knew his broken heart still needed. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, please take a second to like, share, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from today. Your support truly helps this small channel grow and brings us closer to our first 1,000 subscribers. In late October, in the small town of Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, cold mist rolled over Mossback Bridge before sunrise, softening the road, the creek, and the old hills beyond it. Alden Mercer crossed that bridge every morning in the same faded pickup truck. He was 44 years old, a former military police officer who now made a quiet living repairing furniture and restoring old woodwork for people around town. Once his days had been filled with orders, radios, movement, and danger. Now they were filled with sawdust, black coffee, and the steady rhythm of tools against wood. The work suited him because wood did not ask questions. A broken chair could be fixed. A cracked table could be sanded down, glued, clamped, and made useful again. People were not that simple. Alden had learned that after losing Briggs, the canine partner who had served beside him through some of the hardest years of his life. Briggs had been more than a working dog. He had been Alden's shadow, his warning bell, his steady heartbeat in places where men spoke softly because fear was listening. After Briggs died, Alden left the service, moved to Cedar Hollow, and built a life small enough to manage. He rented a modest house near the edge of town, kept his conversations short, and avoided anything that felt like attachment. On his right wrist, he wore a worn leather bracelet made from Briggs's old collar. It was the only piece of the past he allowed to stay close. Mossback Bridge sat about 3 miles from Alden's house. It was an old stone bridge with moss darkening its sides and weeds growing in the cracks near the guardrail. Beneath it, a narrow creek moved over smooth rocks and carried fallen leaves toward the deeper woods. Most people crossed the bridge without thinking about it. Alden noticed things other people missed. Old habits did not leave a man simply because he changed jobs. He noticed tire tracks, broken fence boards, loose gravel, fresh scratches on metal, and shadows where there should not have been movement. That was why he saw the puppy. The first morning, Alden was driving slowly because fog lay thick across the road. As his truck rolled onto Mossback Bridge, something small shifted below near the left support wall. He glanced down through the mist and saw a shape tucked beside a concrete ledge. At first, he thought it was a wet bundle of cloth. Then the shape lifted its head. It was a German shepherd puppy, no more than 5 or 6 weeks old. Its black and tan fur was damp along the belly. One ear folded sideways, while the other seemed to be trying and failing to stand up. Its paws looked too large for its body, as if nature had handed it the feet of a much braver animal and expected the rest to catch up later. The puppy did not bark at the truck. It did not run. It did not even step back into the shadows. It simply sat there, staring toward the far end of the road. Alden slowed almost to a stop. For a moment, his hand moved toward the gear shift. Then a car came up behind him, and the sharp tap of a horn pulled him back into the morning. He drove on, telling himself the puppy probably belonged to someone nearby. Farm dogs wandered. Yard dogs slipped through fences. Puppies followed smells and lost track of time. There were houses scattered beyond the creek, and somebody was likely missing a young dog that had strayed too far before breakfast. By noon, Alden had nearly convinced himself of that. By the next morning, he was less certain. The puppy was there again. Same side of the bridge, same ledge, same small body facing the road beyond the creek. The mist was lighter that morning, and Alden could see more clearly how still the puppy remained. It was not exploring. It was not chasing leaves or sniffing along the bank. It sat like it had been placed there by a hand that never came back. Alden kept driving. On the third morning, he looked for the puppy before he reached the bridge, though he would not have admitted it to anyone. His eyes moved from the road to the creek bank, then to the shadow beneath the stone arch. The puppy was still there. A cold feeling settled under Alden's ribs, not fear exactly, but recognition. He had seen that kind of waiting before, not in puppies, but in people, in men who stared at empty roads after bad news, in families who kept porch lights on long after hope should have gone to bed. The puppy was not wandering. The puppy was waiting. Across the creek lived Elsie Whitcomb, a 13-year-old girl who had been staying with her grandmother for several months. Elsie was quiet, thoughtful, and old enough to understand that adults could break each other's hearts, but still young enough to hope they might stop before everything fell apart. Her parents were living separately. While they tried to work through problems Elsie did not fully understand. So, she stayed with Mrs. Mabel Whitcomb, her 72-year-old grandmother, a retired seamstress with a sharp tongue, a warm kitchen, and a habit of pretending not to care too much. Elsie had noticed the puppy before Alden did. She first saw it from her grandmother's porch while carrying out a bag of trash before a school. The little dog was curled beneath the bridge, nose pointed toward the road. Elsie watched it for several minutes, waiting for someone to call it home. No one did. The next morning, it was still there. So, Elsie wrapped a piece of toast in a napkin and slipped it into her coat pocket. After that came a little bowl of water, then a small cup of warm milk, then an old tool she took from the laundry room and placed inside a cardboard box near the driest part of the bridge. Mrs. Mabel saw more than Elsie realized. She saw the missing towel. She saw the muddy shoes by the back door. She saw her granddaughter standing at the window before sunrise, watching the bridge with the worried face of someone far too young to carry that much tenderness. Mabel did not stop her. She only muttered that children and stray animals had a gift for finding each other, then quietly left an old blanket near the laundry basket where Elsie could pretend to discover it. The puppy accepted the food. It drank the water. Sometimes it slept inside the cardboard box for a little while, but it never stayed hidden for long. It always returned to the same spot beneath the bridge, facing the same road, as if the world had one door and it was waiting for that door to open. By the fourth morning, Alden pulled his truck onto the gravel shoulder beyond the bridge and sat there with the engine running. The heater breathed warm air into the cab, but his hands felt cold on the wheel. Below, the puppy shifted, lowered its head, then raised it again when a passing truck rattled over the stones. It did not chase the sound. It did not flee from it. It simply watched the road after the truck disappeared. Alden looked at the leather bracelet on his wrist. The old collar had darkened over the years from rain, sweat, and memory. For a second, he felt the familiar weight of Briggs walking beside him, though the seat beside him was empty and had been empty for a long time. He told himself again that the puppy belonged to someone. He told himself someone must be feeding it. He told himself it was not his problem. Then the puppy turned its head slightly, and through the pale morning mist, Alden saw how thin it was. That was the first crack in the wall he had built around himself. He did not step out of the truck that morning, not yet. He only sat there longer than he meant to, watching the small German shepherd beneath Mossback Bridge wait for someone who did not come. Above it, cars crossed without slowing. Around it, leaves gathered in wet gold piles. Beyond it, the road disappeared into the trees. And under that old bridge, with its damp stones and quiet creek, a tiny life kept holding on to a promise no one else could see. The next morning, Alden Mercer reached Mossback Bridge before the town had fully woken. A pale gray mist hung over Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, and the creek below the bridge moved quietly over the stones, carrying yellow leaves into the woods. Alden told himself he had left early because he had a cabinet door to finish sanding before noon. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to see if the puppy was still there. It was. The tiny German shepherd sat beneath the bridge in the same place, close to the concrete ledge where the ground stayed a little drier. Its black and tan fur looked damp around the paws, and one soft ear folded sideways in the cold. Beside it was a flattened cardboard box, a towel, and a shallow plastic bowl with only a few drops of water left inside. Alden stood near the roadside and watched. The puppy did not look lost in the usual way. It was not wandering, sniffing, or searching for a way home. It was sitting still, facing the road beyond the bridge, as if the answer to everything might come from that direction. A voice behind him said, "That little thing has more patience than half the people in this town." Alden turned and saw an elderly woman standing near the gate of the blue wooden house across from the bridge. She was Mrs. Mabel Whitcomb, 72 years old, a retired seamstress, and the grandmother of Elsie Whitcomb. Alden had seen her before, usually sweeping her porch or looking at the sky like the weather had personally offended her. "Morning," Alden said. "It was," Mabel replied. Then the leaves started falling again. Alden glanced back at the puppy. "You know how long it's been there?" "At least a week," Mabel said. "Maybe longer. Hard to tell when something small decides to suffer quietly." Alden looked at her more closely. Mabel lifted her mug toward the bridge. "My granddaughter has been feeding him. Elsie, 13 years old. Soft heart, poor sense of secrecy. She thinks I don't notice when bread disappears or when one of my towels suddenly becomes a dog blanket." "That towel was hers?" "Some of it was hers," Mabel said. "Some of it was me pretending I didn't help." For a moment, her sharp voice softened. Alden understood then that Mabel was the kind of woman who hid kindness behind complaint, because kindness, if shown too openly, might ask too much of her. "She brings him food every morning?" Alden asked. "And after school when she can. Water, scraps, warm milk once, though I told her no creature with teeth should start the day like a house cat." Mabel looked down at the puppy. "He eats, drinks, sleeps in that box sometimes, but he always goes back to that same spot." Alden absorbed that. Food should have changed the puppy's behavior. Shelter should have made it rest longer, but the puppy kept returning to the ledge, facing the road. "Anyone nearby missing a German shepherd?" he asked. "Not that I've heard," Mabel said, "and people around here talk if a mailbox leans funny. If someone had lost a puppy, we'd know." Alden walked back to his truck and opened the passenger door. On the seat sat a small paper bag from the market. He had bought soft puppy food, water, and a cheap plastic bowl on the way over, though he had not wanted to admit what that meant. Mabel watched him. "That for your cabinet door?" "No." "Figured." Alden carried the food down the slope beside the bridge. He moved slowly over the wet leaves, careful not to crowd the puppy. The little dog turned its head toward him. Its eyes were dark, steady, and too serious for something so young. It did not back away, but it did not come forward either. Alden crouched several yards away. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm not here to chase you." The puppy watched his hands. Alden opened the can and placed the food into the bowl. The smell spread beneath the bridge, and the puppy's nose twitched. Alden set the bowl down, slid it forward a little, then backed away. The puppy waited. It looked at the food, then at Alden, then toward the road beyond the bridge. For a strange second, Alden felt as if the little dog was asking permission from someone who was not there. Then hunger won. The puppy stood and walked forward with careful steps. It did not creep like an animal terrified of being struck. It did not bounce like a puppy expecting love. It moved as if it had learned to measure every kindness before accepting it. When it reached the bowl, it lowered its head and ate fast. Too fast. Its small body trembled with each swallow. Alden stayed still. He had seen fear wear many faces. Some fear shook, some fear shouted, some fear sat very quietly and refused to leave one place. When the puppy shifted, Alden saw the collar. It was a narrow strip of old dark leather, too rough and worn for a puppy. It had been cut down from something larger, with an uneven edge near the buckle. There was no tag, no name, no phone number, but on the inside of the leather, almost hidden by damp fur, Alden saw a faint mark pressed into it. He leaned just slightly. The puppy stopped eating and looked up. Alden froze. "All right," he murmured. "I won't touch it." The puppy stared at him for another second, then went back to the bowl. A collar changed everything. A stray puppy might wander, a lost puppy might wait. But a puppy wearing a cut-down leather collar had a story attached to it, and Alden did not like the feeling that came with that story. It was quiet, but it was wrong. When the bowl was empty, Alden poured water into the second bowl. The puppy drank quickly, then stepped back and returned to the same concrete ledge. The food had not moved it. The water had not moved it. Even kindness had not moved it. Mabel had come partway down the slope, keeping a careful distance. "See?" she said. "Not scared like he should be. Not friendly either. Like he's waiting to decide what the world is." "Has Elsie tried to pick him up?" Alden asked. "Once. He stepped away, didn't bite, didn't cry, just went back there." Mabel pointed to the ledge. "Like there's a line only he can see." Alden looked at the road. "Did anyone see a vehicle stop here?" Mabel hesitated. Elsie said something about a van the night before she found him, but it was raining, and she gets nervous when adults ask too many questions. Alden said nothing, but the details stayed with him. That evening, Elsie returned to the bridge after school. She was a quiet 13-year-old girl staying with her grandmother, while her parents tried to settle problems of their own. She carried a small container of food inside her jacket and climbed carefully beneath the bridge. The puppy lifted its head when it heard her. "Hi," Elsie whispered. "I brought something better today." She set the food down and sat back. The puppy ate, drank a little, then returned to the ledge and faced the wet road. Elsie watched him for a long moment. "You need a name," she said softly. "I can't keep calling you little guy." The puppy's ears twitched at the sound of a distant truck. Elsie looked toward the road too. "Finch," she whispered. Small but stubborn. The puppy did not answer, but Elsie liked the name. She hugged her knees and lowered her voice. "Are you waiting for your mother?" Finch placed his chin on his paws. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the road beyond Mossback Bridge, as if somewhere out there, in the rain and fading light, someone he loved had vanished but not yet disappeared from his heart. By late afternoon, the clouds over Cedar Hollow had dropped low enough to make the whole town feel smaller. The hills looked faded behind a gray curtain of mist, and Mossback Bridge sat over the creek like an old watchman with tired shoulders. Alden Mercer stood in his workshop, staring at a half-sanded cabinet door, but his mind was not on the wood. It was under the bridge, with the small German shepherd puppy who had eaten from his bowl, and then returned to the same lonely ledge as if food had never been the thing he wanted most. Alden wiped his hands on a rag and picked up his phone. The number for Bellamy Veterinary Clinic was taped to a corkboard near the back door, written in black marker beside reminders for lumber deliveries and customer pickups. He had used the clinic once before to ask about donating old blankets to their rescue fund, but he had never met the doctor for anything personal. When the call connected, a young receptionist answered first, then placed him on hold for less than a minute. "This is Dr. Bellamy," a woman said, slightly breathless but calm. Dr. Marin Bellamy was 39 years old, the only full-time veterinarian in Cedar Hollow, known for treating house pets, farm dogs, barn cats, and the occasional injured raccoon someone insisted was basically friendly. Her voice had the steady focus of someone who was used to hearing worry and turning it into instructions. Alden explained the situation plainly. A German shepherd puppy, about 5 or 6 weeks old, under Mossback Bridge for at least a week, eating when fed, drinking when offered water, but refusing to leave one spot. Damp weather, cold nights, a leather collar cut down from something larger, no tag. Marin was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. "That puppy needs to be brought in," she said. "Soon." Alden looked toward the window. Rain had begun to gather on the glass, not falling hard yet, just enough to darken the yard. "Can someone from the clinic come out?" "I wish I could send someone now," Marin said. "But I'm at a farm outside town with a calving emergency, and my technician is covering surgery recovery. If he's been outside that long, especially at that age, he could decline quickly. Puppies that small can look stable until they suddenly are not." Alden absorbed that without answering. He had heard versions of that sentence before, spoken about men, dogs, weather, and situations everyone wished had been handled earlier. "If you can safely transport him," Marin continued, "bring him to the clinic. Don't chase him. Don't corner him near the creek. Use food, patience, and a crate if you have one. Keep him warm." "I don't have a crate," Alden said. "There's a feed store on Mill Road. They'll have small carriers. Get a blanket too, if you can. Soft food, water. And if he resists, don't force it unless he's in immediate danger." After the call ended, Alden stood still for a few seconds, phone in hand. The workshop smelled of cedar dust and old varnish. Usually that smell settled him. That afternoon, it only reminded him how dry and warm his world was compared to the wet stones under the bridge. He drove to the feed store on Mill Road and bought a small transport crate, a fleece blanket, 2 cans of puppy food, and a bag of soft training treats he did not need but picked up anyway. At the counter, the cashier asked if he had a new dog. Alden said, "Not exactly," which was both true and not true enough. He told himself the plan was simple. Take the puppy to Marin, check for a chip, find the owner if there was one. If not, call a rescue. He had lived long enough to know that people got into trouble when they started naming temporary things. So, he kept his mind on practical steps: crate, food, clinic, shelter, clean lines, safe distance. But hearts rarely obey clean lines. When Alden reached Mossback Bridge, the evening had turned colder. The road was damp, and water dripped from the moss along the stone sides. He parked on the gravel shoulder and carried the crate down the slope carefully. The puppy was in the same place, tucked near the ledge, facing the road. Its head lifted when Alden approached. "Easy," Alden said. "It's just me." The puppy watched him with those serious eyes. Alden set the crate several feet away and opened the door. He placed the fleece blanket inside, then put a small amount of food near the entrance. The smell reached the puppy quickly. Its nose twitched. It stood, took 2 small steps, then stopped. Alden backed away and sat on a flat stone near the creek. He gave the puppy space. He had handled trained dogs before, dogs that understood commands and signals. This was different. Finch, as Elsie had called him, did not know Alden's voice. He did not know what a crate meant. He only knew the bridge, the road, the smell of old rain, and whatever memory kept him tied to that place. Minutes passed. The puppy moved toward the food, ate a little, then stepped back from the crate door. Alden tried again, placing another small bite just inside the entrance. Finch came close enough to smell it, but his paws stopped at the threshold. His head turned toward the concrete ledge, then toward the road. Then back to Alden. "You think leaving means giving up," Alden murmured. Finch did not understand the words, but Alden did. Sometimes a place became holy for all the wrong reasons. A hospital room, a roadside, a kennel after the dog was gone, a bridge where a puppy had last smelled his mother. People called it memory. Animals simply stayed. Alden did not reach for him. He did not rush. He rested his forearms on his knees and waited while the creek moved steadily below. A truck crossed overhead, shaking the old stones. Finch flinched, then lowered himself close to the ground, but he did not run. His eyes returned to Alden. Alden slowly extended one hand, palm down, not close enough to touch. "I know," he said softly. "The world has not made much sense lately." As he leaned forward, his sleeve slipped back from his wrist. The old leather bracelet showed in the gray light. It was dark from years of wear, cracked at the edge, and held together by a plain metal clasp. It had once been part of Briggs's collar. Finch froze. For the first time since Alden had seen him, the puppy stopped watching the road. His whole body went still, his nose lifted. He took one step forward, then another, not toward the food, not toward the crate, but toward Alden's wrist. Alden did not move, breath held in his chest. Finch came close enough that Alden could feel the warmth of his small breath against his skin. The puppy pressed his nose to the leather bracelet and inhaled deeply. Once, twice. Then he stayed there, nose resting against the worn leather, as if he had found a word in a language only dogs remembered. Alden felt something inside him shift painfully. Briggs was gone. He knew that with the cruel certainty of a man who had buried what he loved. This was not Briggs returning. It was not a miracle wrapped in fur and mist, but scent carried truth in ways humans often forgot. The bracelet smelled of old leather, rain, antiseptic, wood dust, and years of Alden's skin. It also carried the last physical trace of a dog who had once made Alden feel safe in dangerous places. To Finch, that scent meant something close to safety. Alden lowered his voice until it was almost a whisper. "That was Briggs," he said. "He was a good dog." Finch kept his nose against the bracelet for another moment. Then he looked up at Alden, and the fear in his eyes did not vanish, but it changed shape. It loosened just enough to make room for a choice. Alden reached slowly for a piece of food and placed it inside the crate, beside the blanket. "Come on, little one." Finch turned toward the ledge once more. His ears trembled. He looked at the road beyond the bridge, at the place he had watched for 7 days, at the invisible line he had refused to cross. Then he looked back at Alden's wrist. This time he stepped forward. One paw entered the crate, then the second. He paused, breathing fast. Alden stayed perfectly still. Finch took another step, then another, until his small body was inside the blanket-lined space. He turned once, uncertain, and curled low against the fleece. Alden closed the crate door gently. No struggle came, no cry, only a small breath from inside the carrier, tired and shaky, as if Finch had been holding himself together for too long and had finally allowed the first thread to loosen. Alden lifted the crate and carried it up the slope. The bridge behind him looked strangely empty now. The cardboard box remained under the ledge. The towel lay folded in the shadows. The creek kept moving, indifferent and eternal, carrying leaves away from the place where waiting had lived for a week. At the top of the slope, Alden paused and looked back once. He did not know what Finch had lost on that road. He did not know who had put the old leather collar around his neck. He did not know why the scent of Briggs had been enough to make the puppy choose him. But as he placed the crate on the passenger seat of his truck, one thing was clear. Alden had gone to Mossback Bridge to remove a puppy from the cold. Instead, he had carried away the first piece of a story that had been waiting for him beneath the stones. Bellamy Veterinary Clinic sat near the north side of Cedar Hollow, between a hardware store and a small white church. By the time Alden Mercer carried the transport crate through the front door, evening had settled over town, and the clinic windows glowed warmly against the damp gray outside. Inside, the air smelled of clean floors, medicine, and nervous animals waiting to be helped. Dr. Marin Bellamy met him near the exam room. She was 39 years old, Cedar Hollow's only full-time veterinarian, and a woman who had learned to move quickly without making frightened people or frightened animals feel rushed. Her sleeves were pushed up, and she looked tired from the farm emergency she had just finished, but her voice stayed calm. "This must be the bridge puppy," she said. Alden set the crate on the exam table. "His name is Finch," he answered, then paused, surprised by how naturally the name came out. Marin noticed, but she did not smile too much. She opened the crate slowly and let Finch smell her hand before reaching in. The puppy stayed low against the fleece blanket, watching her with dark, careful eyes. He did not growl. He did not snap. He only stiffened when she lifted him, then settled because exhaustion had worn down the last of his strength. The exam was gentle. Marin checked his eyes, gums, paws, belly, temperature, and heartbeat. Finch trembled through most of it, but whenever he heard Alden shift his boots beside the table, his breathing seemed to steady. "He's underweight," Marin said. "Mildly dehydrated, too. His stress response is high, but I don't see any serious injuries. No broken bones, no deep wounds. Considering he has been outside for days, that is good news." She scanned him for a microchip. The device made no sound. Then she checked the clinic records and local missing pet reports. Nothing matched him. No German Shepherd puppy his age. No owner calling with his description. No family looking for a small black and tan pup found near Mossback Bridge. Alden looked at Finch, who had curled his paws beneath himself on the table. "So, no one is looking for him." "I can't promise that," Marin said carefully, "but no one has reported him to us." The words were not dramatic, but they landed heavily. Finch was alive because a 13-year-old girl had carried food under a bridge, not because an owner had come searching. Marin turned her attention to the collar. She did not remove it right away. She bent closer, studying the old leather, the uneven cut near the buckle, and the extra hole punched through the strap. "This wasn't made for a puppy," she said. Alden leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "It looks like a piece cut from a larger training lead or working collar. See how thick the leather is? And these marks inside." She turned the strap gently toward the light. "They're faded, but they look like inventory marks. Maybe from old canine equipment, maybe from a training supply lot. I don't want to guess too far yet, but it is unusual." Alden felt the same quiet wrongness he had felt under the bridge. The collar did not look like something Kurk chosen with care. It looked like something made to fit because someone needed it to fit. Marin gave him instructions for the night. Small meals, clean water, warmth, rest. No crowding him, no forcing affection. Let Finch decide when to come closer. "I can keep him here overnight," she offered. Alden looked at Finch. The puppy's eyes were half closed, but they still drifted toward Alden's wrist, where the old leather bracelet from Briggs's collar rested against his skin. "No," Alden said softly. "I'll take him home." He told himself it was temporary. Finch needed quiet, and Alden's house had plenty of quiet. Too much quiet, most days. Alden's house stood on a narrow road outside the center of town. It was small, plain, and orderly, with a workshop behind it and a porch that needed repainting. The room smelled of pine boards, black coffee, old books, and tool oil. For months, the silence inside had felt safe. When Alden carried Finch through the door, that silence seemed to pause, as if it had not expected company. At first, Finch stayed inside the open crate near the living room wall. Alden placed water nearby and set a little food a few feet away. He did not reach in. He did not coax too much. He only sat across the room and let the puppy study the new world. After nearly an hour, Finch stepped out. He sniffed the rug, the coffee table, then Alden's work boots by the door. He stayed there longest, pressing his nose to the worn leather. When the refrigerator clicked on, Finch jumped sideways and bumped into the rug. Alden almost smiled. "It's all right," he said. "That one only growls when it's working." Finch looked toward the kitchen with deep suspicion. The next morning, the house changed in small but undeniable ways. Finch discovered the toaster. When it clicked, he barked once, then looked startled by his own courage. Alden stared at him for a second, then laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but it was real, and it sounded strange in a room that had gone too long without one. Later, Finch found a sock near the laundry basket and tried to drag it across the living room. The sock was nearly as long as he was. He tripped over it, recovered, dragged it under a chair, and fell asleep with one paw on top of it like a guard protecting treasure. Alden watched from the doorway with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. For the first time in a long while, the house did not feel empty. It felt interrupted, untidy, alive. But Finch still carried the bridge inside him. That first night, Alden placed the fleece blanket near the living room wall. Finch gripped it in his little teeth and dragged it slowly across the floor until it lay near the front door. Then he curled on top of it with his nose pointed toward the road. Alden thought little of it at first. Puppies did odd things. The second night, Finch did it again. On the third night, Alden stood in the hallway and watched. Finch pulled the blanket to the same place, turned twice, and settled with his face pointed toward the dark road outside. Alden looked through the front window. Far beyond the trees, in that same direction, was Mossback Bridge. The understanding came quietly. Finch had left the bridge, but the bridge had not left Finch. Alden crouched beside him. "You're still waiting," he whispered. Finch blinked sleepily and rested his chin on the blanket. His belly was full. His fur was dry. No rain touched him now. No passing truck shook the stones above him. But somewhere inside that small body, a thread still ran back to the place where he had last known his mother. The next afternoon, Elsie Whitcomb came to visit with her grandmother. Elsie was 13, a quiet middle school student staying with Mabel, while her parents tried to settle problems of their own. She stood on Alden's porch, holding a small bag of puppy treats like an offering. When Finch saw her, he stumbled forward so fast his paws slipped on the floor. Elsie dropped to her knees, and Finch reached her with soft, clumsy joy. He pressed his nose into her sleeve, and Elsie laughed through sudden tears. "He remembers me," she whispered. Mabel folded her arms. "Of course he does. You fed him better than I feed myself." Alden stood back and watched Finch lean into the girl who had kept him alive when everyone else had simply crossed the bridge overhead. For the first time in months, Elsie did not look like a child trying to stay invisible while adults worried around her. She looked needed. Finch had brought questions, worry, muddy paw prints, and a small, stubborn hope into Alden's quiet house. And somehow, that was enough to make the silence loosen its grip. Finch was not afraid of the ordinary things Alden Mercer expected a rescued puppy to fear. By the end of his first week in Alden's house, the tiny German Shepherd had learned that the refrigerator's low hum was not a threat, that the old floorboards complained under everyone's feet, and that the toaster, though suspicious, could be defeated by one sharp bark at breakfast. He still moved carefully in new rooms, still watched hands before trusting them, but he did not hide from Alden anymore. When Alden sat at the kitchen table with black coffee and paperwork from the clinic, Finch often curled beside his boot, one paw resting on the leather as if guarding the man from whatever ghosts might come through the door. He was not afraid of Dr. Marin Bellamy either. When the 39-year-old veterinarian stopped by one afternoon to check on his weight and hydration, Finch sniffed her bag, sneezed at the scent of medicine, then allowed her to examine him with the weary patience of a very small king receiving a royal inspection. Marin said he was improving. His gums looked better. His body was warmer. His appetite was strong, almost too strong, which made Alden careful with the small meals. Mrs. Mabel Whitcomb came with Elsie the same day, carrying a folded towel and a small jar of treats she claimed were not a habit. Mabel was 72, a retired seamstress and Elsie's grandmother, and she had a gift for making kindness sound like an inconvenience. Finch seemed to understand her perfectly. He wagged once when she called him that little troublemaker, then tried to chew the corner of her shoelace. Mabel pointed a finger at him and said he had no manners. 5 minutes later, she slipped him half a treat when she thought no one was watching. For a few days, the house almost felt lighter. Finch chased a dry leaf that blew against the glass door. He fell asleep halfway under Alden's chair. He dragged his fleece blanket from room to room, never with much success, but always with the determination of a creature moving furniture for reasons known only to himself. Alden began to catch himself talking aloud. Not much, just small things. That's not food. Leave the broom alone. You are not as fierce as you think you are. Finch listened to all of it with solemn attention, as if every sentence mattered. Then the delivery van came. It was late afternoon, with a thin rain tapping against the porch roof. Alden was in the kitchen rinsing Finch's food bowl when tires crunched on the gravel outside. Finch lifted his head from the rug. A man in his 30s, a local delivery driver wearing a brown jacket and carrying a cardboard package, stepped out of a gray van near the porch. Alden saw him through the window and reached for a towel to dry his hands. The driver slid the side door open. The sound was brief, metallic, and ordinary. A rough track, a hollow clack, then the low roll of the door locking into place. To Alden, it was nothing. To Finch, it was thunder from another life. The puppy's body dropped flat against the floor. Alden turned immediately. Finch was no longer the little dog who barked at the toaster or wrestled with socks. His belly pressed against the wood. His ears flattened. His eyes went wide, searching the room without seeing it. He did not run in circles. He did not bark. He crawled backward until his shoulders touched Alden's boots, then tried to tuck himself behind them as if the boots could become a wall. The driver knocked on the door. Finch trembled. Alden did not move toward the door at first. He crouched slowly beside the puppy, keeping his voice low. "Easy, Finch. You're safe." Finch did not seem to hear him. His eyes stayed fixed on the front of the house. Another small sound came from the van outside, metal shifting against metal, and Finch flinched so hard his paws scraped the floor. Alden understood then that this fear had not been born under Mossback Bridge. The bridge had been cold. It had been lonely. But this was different. This was memory. This was something Finch's body remembered before his mind could explain it. Alden stood, opened the door only halfway, and took the package from the driver without letting him step inside. The driver, whose name tag read Cal, was a man of about 35 who delivered supplies around Cedar Hollow and knew enough about small towns not to ask too many questions when someone looked worried. Alden thanked him, set the package inside, and closed the door gently. The van door slid shut outside. Finch pressed closer to Alden's boots and shook until the vehicle drove away. That evening, Elsie came by with Mabel. Elsie was 13, a quiet middle school student who had been staying with her grandmother while her parents worked through problems that had left the family stretched thin and tender. She noticed Finch's low posture as soon as she entered. "What happened?" she asked. Alden explained the delivery van, the sound of the sliding door, and the way Finch had reacted. As he spoke, Elsie's face changed. The color seemed to leave her cheeks slowly, like light leaving the sky before a storm. Mabel noticed too. "Elsie?" The girl looked down at Finch. He had come near her, but he did not jump or wag the way he usually did. He leaned against her shin, tired from fear. "I saw a van," Elsie said at last. Alden stayed quiet. Elsie swallowed. "The night before Finch showed up under the bridge. It was raining hard. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the porch. I saw headlights near Mossback Bridge. A gray van stopped there." Mabel's hand tightened around the strap of her purse. "You never told me that." "I thought I imagined part of it," Elsie said. "It was dark. The rain was on the windows, but I heard dogs, not barking exactly, more like crying. Her voice grew smaller. There was something painted on the side of the van. A bird, I think. A black hawk. Alden felt the room narrow around those words. A gray van, dogs crying, a black hawk, a puppy with a cut-down leather collar, a week beneath the bridge, waiting. "Did anyone get out?" he asked gently. "I don't know. I got scared and went back inside. I thought if I told someone, they'd say I was making it bigger than it was." Elsie looked at him with wet eyes. "Then Finch was there in the morning." Alden did not blame her. He could see she had already done that to herself enough. "You were a child looking out a window in the rain," he said. "Being scared does not make you responsible for what someone else did." Elsie wiped her face quickly, embarrassed by the tears. Finch lifted his nose and nudged her hand, a clumsy little comfort from a puppy who had every reason to need comfort himself. From that moment, Finch was no longer only a rescued dog in Alden's house. He was a witness. Not in the way people understood witnesses, with statements and dates and clear answers. Finch carried the truth in his body, in the way he froze at the van door, in the way he still dragged his blanket to the front door each night, in the way his eyes turned toward the road leading back to Mossback Bridge. Later, after Elsie and Mabel left, the rain softened. Alden sat on the floor beside Finch near the front door. As always, Finch had pulled his fleece blanket there and curled on it with his nose pointed toward the dark road. Alden touched the leather bracelet on his wrist, the last piece of Briggs he still carried. "All right, little one," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we go back to the bridge." Finch blinked up at him, then rested his chin on the blanket. Outside, the road shone black under the rain, and somewhere beyond it, Mossback Bridge waited with whatever secret had been left beneath its stones. The next morning came pale and cold over Cedar Hollow. Rain had stopped during the night, but the world still looked soaked through. Water clung to the fence rails, gathered along the roadside, and dripped from the bare branches near Mossback Bridge. Alden Mercer loaded Finch into the passenger side of his pickup just after breakfast, then drove toward the bridge with the heater low and the windows fogging at the edges. Finch sat wrapped in his fleece blanket, quiet but alert, his nose working before the bridge even came into view. Elsie Whitcomb and Mrs. Mabel Whitcomb were already waiting near the blue wooden house when Alden pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Elsie was 13, a quiet middle school student who had been staying with her grandmother while her parents worked through their problems. She wore a coat too large for her and held her hands together as if trying to keep her worry from spilling out. Mabel, 72 years old and a retired seamstress, stood beside her with the expression of a woman who had agreed to come only because everyone else clearly needed supervision. "I'm here to make sure nobody does anything foolish," Mabel announced as Alden stepped out. Elsie glanced at the bulging pocket of her grandmother's coat. "Then why did you bring dog treats?" Mabel looked offended. "Emergency supplies. And the towel? For mud? And the warm water? For common sense, which is apparently in short supply." Alden almost smiled, but Finch had gone very still inside the truck. The puppy's eyes were fixed on Mossback Bridge. His ears trembled, and his small body leaned forward against the crate door, as if something under the stones had called his name. Alden opened the crate and clipped on the light leash Marin had given him. "Slowly," he said. "We let him show us." The moment Finch's paws touched the ground, he changed. At Alden's house, he had been a clumsy little creature who barked at kitchen appliances and dragged socks like stolen treasure. Here, near the bridge, that softness disappeared. His nose dropped to the wet earth, his body lowered. Every step became careful, tense, and focused. He moved not like a puppy exploring, but like a tiny survivor following a road only he could see. Alden followed, keeping the leash loose. Elsie stayed close behind, while Mabel picked her way over the damp leaves, muttering that old bones and wet slopes were a terrible partnership. Finch passed the cardboard box where he had once slept. He sniffed the towel, then moved past it without stopping. He was not interested in the place where he had been kept alive. He was searching for the place where something had been lost. Near the left support wall, Finch stopped. The area was partly hidden beneath dead leaves washed into a dark pile by the rain. Moss grew between the stones, and the ground had hardened where mud had dried after the last storm. Finch began to scratch. His paws were small, but he worked with fierce urgency, scraping leaves aside, pushing his nose into the damp earth, then scraping again. "Finch," Elsie whispered. The puppy did not look up. Alden crouched beside him. He did not touch the spot at first. He watched the way Finch worked around the base of the stone support, circling back to one narrow patch beneath a shelf of concrete. Then Alden took a pair of work gloves from his jacket and began moving the leaves by hand. Beneath the top layer, he found a scrap of blue fabric. It was torn, dirty, and stiff with dried mud. At first, it looked like nothing more than cloth from an old tarp or work shirt, but Finch lowered his nose to it and made a sound Alden had not heard before. It was not a bark. It was not a cry. It was a thin, aching whine that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his small ballroom. Elsie covered her mouth. "Is that from his mother?" Alden did not answer too quickly. He had learned long ago not to promise comfort before truth had earned it. He lifted the fabric carefully and saw several longer black and tan hairs caught in the fibers. Not puppy fur, adult dog fur. Mabel stopped muttering. Alden placed the fabric inside a clean plastic bag he had brought from the truck. Then Finch scratched again, a few inches away. Alden cleared more leaves and found a short section of broken leash. The nylon was frayed hard at one end, as if it had snapped under force or been cut and pulled apart. Near it, pressed into old mud by the narrow service road, were faint tire marks. They had been softened by rain, but not erased. Alden took out his phone and photographed everything. The fabric, the leash, the tire tracks, the position near the bridge support. He marked the location on a small notepad from his glove compartment, writing the time, date, and weather conditions with the quiet precision of the man he used to be. Elsie watched him. "You believe me now, don't you? About the van?" Alden looked up at her. "I believed you last night." Her eyes filled, but she held the tears back. Mabel placed a hand on her shoulder. For once she had no sharp remark ready. She only pulled Elsie closer, as if the truth under the leaves had made the girl seem both braver and younger at the same time. Finch sat beside the cleared patch, trembling. Alden gently lifted him before he could keep digging, and hurt his paws. The puppy did not fight. He pressed his face into Alden's jacket, then twisted his head back toward the bridge, toward the fabric, toward whatever memory still lived there. Alden carried the evidence to his truck and called Dr. Marin Bellamy. Marin, 39, Cedar Hollow's only full-time veterinarian, listened carefully while Alden described what they had found. Her voice grew quiet when he mentioned the adult dog hair and the broken leash. "I'll check the missing reports again," she said. "Not just Cedar Hollow, neighboring counties too. If there's a pattern, we need to know." By early afternoon, Alden was at the clinic with the bagged evidence placed on Marin's counter. Marin had already begun making calls. She found several reports from the past few months involving missing German shepherds, including 2 adult females and 1 litter that vanished from a property outside the county line. Some reports were vague. Some owners had assumed the dogs escaped, but the timing made Alden's jaw tighten. "This may be bigger than Finch," Marin said. Alden looked down at the puppy sleeping near his boot. "I was afraid of that." There was a time when Alden might have gone straight to the old service roads himself. A younger version of him would have followed anger until it became action. But Briggs had died during a mission Alden still replayed too often. A mission where waiting for support might have changed everything. He would not let guilt dress itself up as courage again. So, he made the calls. Deputy Silas Crow was 41, a local sheriff's deputy known around Cedar Hollow for being careful, patient, and hard to hurry. Alden explained what they had found, what Elsie had seen, and what Marin had discovered in the missing dog reports. Silas did not make promises he could not keep, but he did agree the evidence needed attention. He told Alden to send the photos and preserve the items. Then he said he would contact Animal Control. The county animal control officer was Rita Hanley, 53, a practical woman who had spent years handling stray dogs, neglected livestock, and calls nobody else wanted to take. She listened to Silas, then asked for Marin's notes and the photos from Mossback Bridge. That night, Finch slept under Alden's kitchen table, with one paw resting on the old towel Elsie had placed beneath the bridge. His belly was full, his fur was dry. Yet in sleep, his paws moved faintly, as if he were still running along a wet road after something he could not catch. Alden sat nearby, the leather bracelet from Briggs's collar warm against his wrist. Finch had left Mossback Bridge, but part of him was still beneath those dead leaves, still listening for a mother's voice in the rain. And now, at last, Alden was listening too. The days after the discovery beneath Mossback Bridge did not bring answers as quickly as Elsie Whitcomb hoped. They brought phone calls, printed reports, careful notes, and the slow patience of people who knew that a bad truth needed more than a feeling before it could be confronted. Alden Mercer understood that better than anyone. He had spent years as a military police officer learning that suspicion could point a man in the right direction, but evidence was what opened the door. Dr. Marin Bellamy worked from her small office behind the exam rooms at Bellamy Veterinary Clinic. She was 39 years old, Cedar Hollow's only full-time veterinarian, and the kind of woman who could sound gentle while asking questions that made people uncomfortable. She called nearby clinics, checked rescue groups, and searched through missing dog posts from the past few months. The pattern was not perfect, but it was there. German Shepherds had gone missing in 3 neighboring areas. 2 were adult females. One report mentioned a mother dog with young pups. Another mentioned a man selling working-line German Shepherd puppies, with a story that changed depending on who asked. By the second afternoon, Marin had a name, Dale Rusk. Dale was a 48-year-old man who lived on an old property near the edge of Cedar Hollow, where the paved road turned rough and the woods grew close to the fence line. He was known as a handyman, a small-time dog trader, and a man who always seemed to have an explanation ready before anyone finished asking a question. Online, he advertised German Shepherd puppies as retired K9 bloodline and service stock, though the paperwork he showed buyers was unclear and hard to verify. When Marin told Alden, he stood in her clinic office with Finch sleeping near his boot and felt the old, familiar tightening in his chest. "Does he use a logo?" Alden asked. Marin turned her laptop toward him. On the screen was a blurry photo from an old listing. Behind a wire pen, on the side of a gray van, was a dark bird shape with spread wings. Alden leaned closer, a black hawk. Elsie had not imagined it. Deputy Silas Crow came to the clinic that evening. Silas was 41 years old, a local sheriff's deputy known for being careful, steady, and hard to push into quick decisions. He listened while Marin explained the missing dog reports. Alden showed him the photographs from Mossback Bridge, the torn blue fabric, the broken leash, the faint tire tracks, the old leather collar on Finch. Elsie's account of the gray van was written down too, though Silas was careful with it because she was a child and the night had been dark and rainy. "I'm not saying nothing happened," Silas said. "I'm saying we have to move right." Alden nodded. "I know." And he did know. That was the part that hurt. A younger version of him would have driven out to Dale Rusk's property by himself and let anger decide the rest. But Alden had already buried one partner after a night when he wished he had waited for support. He would not turn Finch's fear into another reckless mistake. Silas agreed to look into Dale's records and speak with animal control. He also warned them that unclear advertising and missing dog reports were not enough for a search. They needed something stronger, something current. Something that showed an animal was in danger or that Dale was connected to the bridge. The waiting frustrated Elsie most of all. She came to Alden's house the next day with Mabel and sat on the floor while Finch chewed gently on a rope toy. Elsie was 13, a quiet middle school student staying with her grandmother while her parents worked through problems that had left the girl feeling like a visitor in her own life. She watched Finch tug the rope with his tiny paws braced wide, and her face looked older than it should have. "What if they move the dogs before anyone checks?" she asked. Alden did not give her an easy answer. "That is why we keep paying attention." Mabel Whitcomb, Elsie's 72-year-old grandmother and a retired seamstress, stood in Alden's kitchen holding a paper bag of dog treats she claimed she had bought by accident. "Paying attention sounds much better than doing something foolish," she said. Then she lowered her voice and added, "Although I have known a few foolish things to work, on occasion." Alden glanced at her. Mabel lifted her chin. "I said on occasion. Don't quote me." That small bit of humor eased the room, but only for a while. Later that afternoon, Alden drove Elsie and Mabel to the feed store on Mill Road to pick up more food for Finch. The parking lot was half full, the sky low and gray, the kind of afternoon when everything looked ordinary enough to hide what was wrong. Finch rode in a small harness beside Alden. He had been calm through most of the trip, sniffing the air from Elsie's lap as if the world had finally become large enough to be interesting again. But as they walked past the side of the store, a gray van parked near the loading area. Its sliding door opened. The sound cut through the afternoon. Metal on track, a hollow clack, a roll, then a stop. Finch froze. For one heartbeat, Alden expected him to drop flat like before, but this time, Finch did something different. His body trembled, his ears pinned back, and fear shook through him, yet he stepped in front of Elsie. The puppy planted his oversized paws on the damp pavement and barked with everything he had. The sound was small, but fierce. Elsie stopped behind him. "Finch?" The van belonged to a farmer loading feed, not Dale Rusk. There was no Black Hawk on its side, no hidden danger, no crying dogs. But Finch did not know that. His body remembered a gray van, a door, rain, and separation. Even afraid, he had placed himself between Elsie and the sound. Alden knelt and put one hand lightly near Finch's shoulder. "Easy," he said. "I've got you." Finch kept barking until the door slid shut. Then he leaned back against Elsie's leg, shaking. Elsie bent down and wrapped both arms around him. Her face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. "He was scared," she whispered, "but he still tried to protect me." Alden looked at the puppy and felt something tighten and soften inside him at the same time. Finch was not strong enough to protect anyone from a real threat. He was small, underweight, and still learning how to walk across slick floors without sliding. But courage had appeared in him before size, before certainty, before safety. Sometimes that was how courage came. Not roaring like a lion, but shaking like a leaf and standing anyway. That night, Elsie asked Alden if she could call her parents from his porch. He gave her privacy, but the window was open enough for him to hear pieces of her voice. She told them about the van, about Finch, about being scared that night and saying nothing because she thought grown-ups would tell her not to worry. Then her voice broke a little. "I don't want everyone to keep saying I'm fine just because I'm quiet," she said. There was a long silence on the other end. This time, Elsie did not rush to fill it. When she came back inside, her eyes were red, but she stood straighter. "They listened," she said. Mabel looked away quickly and pretended to examine a loose thread on her sleeve. Later, Silas called Alden. He had checked Dale Rusk's old complaints. Nothing strong enough for a search yet, but enough to keep watching. Animal control had been notified. If there was a sign of immediate danger, they could act quickly. Alden thanked him and ended the call. Finch was asleep by then, curled beside Alden's old work boots. One paw rested on the leather, as if guarding the place where Alden stood in the world. Alden looked at the small dog, then at the bracelet made from Briggs's collar. The night outside was quiet, but it did not feel peaceful. Somewhere beyond Cedar Hollow, a man with a Black Hawk on his van might still be hiding the rest of Finch's story, and Alden knew the next part would not wait forever. Rain returned to Cedar Hollow that night with a restless, searching sound. It moved over the roofs, tapped against windows, and ran in silver lines down the old glass of Alden Mercer's small house. Beyond town, Mossback Bridge stood in the dark with water rushing hard beneath it, and the woods near the county line bent under the wind. Alden had spent the evening trying to keep his mind on simple things. He washed Finch's bowl, checked the back door, folded the fleece blanket, and told himself that Deputy Silas Crow was watching the situation with Dale Rusk the right way. Careful, legal, patient. But patience became harder when the rain sounded so much like the night Elsie had seen the gray van. Finch had been quiet for most of the evening. The little German shepherd puppy slept near Alden's boots, his body fuller and stronger than it had been under the bridge, but still small enough to disappear inside the folds of his blanket. Every so often his paws twitched in his sleep. Alden had begun to recognize the difference between ordinary puppy dreams and the deeper, troubled ones. In the troubled ones, Finch did not chase anything. He seemed to run after something that was already gone. Just before 10 o'clock, Alden reached for the front door lock. Finch's head snapped up. Alden froze. The puppy stood slowly, ears lifted, body stiff, eyes fixed toward the dark road outside. For a few seconds, there was only rain. Then Finch barked. It was not the surprised bark he gave the toaster. It was not the brave little warning he used for squirrels outside the window. This sound was sharp, urgent, and full of something that made Alden's hand move away from the lock. "Finch," Alden said quietly. The puppy ran to the door, turned back, and barked again. Then he looked toward Alden with a desperation that needed no translation. Alden felt the old pull in his chest, the dangerous instinct to grab his coat and go alone. He stopped himself before it could become action. That instinct had cost him too much once. He picked up his phone and called Deputy Silas. Silas Crow, 41 years old, and a local sheriff's deputy, known for being steady under pressure, answered on the second ring. Alden told him Finch was reacting hard, facing the direction of Dale Rusk's property. He did not add drama. He did not need to. Silas heard enough in his voice. "Do not go in by yourself," Silas said. "I won't." "I'll meet you near the old logging road. I'm calling Rita and Dr. Bellamy." Rita Hanley, 53 years old, was the county animal control officer, a practical woman who had spent years handling neglected animals and dangerous calls most people preferred not to see. Dr. Maren Bellamy, 39, Cedar Hollow's only full-time veterinarian, had already told them to call if Finch reacted strongly again. Within minutes, the careful waiting of the last few days began to move. Alden put Finch in his harness and drove through the rain. The truck headlights cut through the dark, catching wet branches, shining ditches, and the pale flash of water running across the road. Finch stood on the passenger seat, nose lifted toward the cracked window. He did not bark during the drive. That worried Alden more than barking would have. The puppy seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. They met Silas near the old logging road. Rita arrived in a county vehicle with crates, gloves, and heavy flashlights. Maren pulled in behind her, carrying a medical bag and wearing a rain jacket over her clinic clothes. No one wasted words. Silas reminded everyone that they were checking a possible animal welfare emergency based on evidence, reports, and immediate concern. They would not force anything without cause. They would document everything. Dale Rusk's property sat beyond a line of wet trees, where a leaning fence bordered an old storage building. From the front, the place looked abandoned. A rusted tractor sat near the drive. Broken pallets leaned beside a shed. No lights shone in the windows of the main building, but Alden noticed fresh tire marks near the mud, partly filled by rain. Finch noticed something else. The puppy began pulling, not toward the main entrance, but around the side of the building. Alden followed carefully, keeping the leash short but loose. Silas walked beside him with a flashlight. Rita and Maren stayed close behind. Rain struck the metal roof above them, loud enough to cover almost every other sound. Almost. Finch stopped at the back of the building, near a wooden door partly hidden behind a loose sheet of tin. He scratched at the bottom of it with both front paws, then barked, then pressed his nose to the crack beneath the frame. His little body shook, but he did not back away. Alden listened. At first, he heard only rain on metal. Then, beneath it, came something thin and broken. A dog's cry. Silas heard it too. His face changed. "Rita?" Rita stepped forward, listened, and nodded once. "There are animals inside." Silas called it in and requested permission to enter under emergency animal welfare grounds. The answer came quickly enough, though every second felt stretched thin. When Silas moved the sheet of tin aside and forced the old latch, the wooden door opened with a swollen groan. The smell rolled out first. Damp straw, old waste, fear. The kind of smell that made Maren move before anyone asked her to. Inside, the flashlight beams found rows of makeshift pens. Some were built from scrap wood, others from wire panels tied together with rope. Dogs lifted their heads from the shadows. A few barked weakly. Some did not have the strength. Maren's voice stayed calm, but Alden saw the anger behind it. "We need to triage them. Smallest and weakest first." Rita moved fast, marking pens and checking water bowls. Silas began photographing the room and calling for backup. Alden stayed near the doorway with Finch, keeping him from rushing into the chaos. The puppy strained forward, whining, his eyes fixed on the farthest corner. There, behind a stack of boards, was another door. Finch pulled so hard his paws slid on the wet floor. Alden followed him, stepping over loose straw and broken plastic bowls. The second door was lower, older, and blocked by a cracked feed bin. Finch scratched at it until his tiny nails clicked against the wood. Maren came beside Alden. "Do you hear that?" This time the sound was softer than before, not a bark, a low exhausted whimper. Silas helped move the bin. Rita cut a length of wire holding the latch. When the door opened, the flashlight beam fell across a narrow storage space. In the back, curled on a stained blanket, lay an adult female German shepherd. She was thin, her black and tan coat dull, her body weak from stress and neglect. But when Finch made a small sound, her head lifted. The room seemed to stop breathing. Finch went silent. The mother dog stared at him. Her eyes were tired, but recognition moved through them like a lantern being lit behind old glass. Finch trembled once, then let out a soft, broken whine. Alden looked at Marin. Is it safe? Marin stepped in first, slow and careful. She checked the mother dog's posture, her breathing, and the space around her. Then she nodded, slowly. Alden unclipped Finch's leash. The puppy did not run like a playful dog. He moved like a missing piece returning to the place it had been torn from. He crossed the small room on unsteady paws, lowered himself, and pressed his face into the mother dog's neck. The mother lifted her head higher and began to lick him, slowly, weakly, tenderly. Finch folded himself against her chest and shook with a sound too small to be called crying, yet everyone in the room understood it. Marin looked away for a moment. Rita lowered her flashlight. Silas stopped writing in his notebook. Alden stood in the doorway and felt the old ache of Briggs rise inside him, not as a wound this time, but as a witness. Some bonds did not need proof, some reunions did not need words. A mother's tongue on her puppy's head was enough to make the whole dark room feel like it had found a window. Outside, the rain kept falling over Cedar Hollow. Inside the hidden room, among broken crates and forgotten straw, Finch had found the one answer he had been waiting for beneath Mossback Bridge. By morning, the rain had moved east, leaving Cedar Hollow washed clean and strangely quiet. The old storage building on Dale Rusk's property no longer looked abandoned. It looked exposed. Sheriff's vehicles lined the muddy drive. Animal control crates sat beneath a temporary canopy. Dr. Marin Bellamy moved from dog to dog with careful hands and a tired face, while Rita Hanley and 2 volunteers carried blankets, water bowls, and clean towels through the open doors. Dale Rusk, 48 years old, a local handyman and dog trader, was arrested before sunrise. He had tried to explain the dogs as breeding stock, rescue animals, and private property, changing the story each time Deputy Silas Crow asked a clearer question. Silas, 41, the local sheriff's deputy handling the case, did not argue with him. He simply documented everything: the makeshift pens, the weak dogs, the hidden room, the broken leashes, the old collars stacked in boxes near the back wall. Alden Mercer stood outside the building with Finch wrapped in a blanket against his chest. The puppy was exhausted after the night's discovery, but he kept lifting his head toward the open doorway where his mother had been carried out. Dr. Marin had said the mother dog was alive, weak, dehydrated, and frightened, but alive. For Finch, that was the only truth that mattered. Inside Dale's storage room, Silas found shelves filled with old dog equipment. There were worn leashes, cracked leather collars, faded name tags, training sleeves, rusted clips, and canvas bags marked with old inventory numbers. Some had come from public auctions. Some had likely passed through private hands. Dale had used them like theater props, building a story around every puppy he sold. He promised buyers canine bloodlines, working heritage, and retired police stock, knowing that many people wanted to believe in a noble story more than they wanted to read the paperwork. Marin examined the box of collars later that afternoon at the clinic. The dogs had been moved there, or to temporary foster spaces, depending on their condition. Finch's mother was placed in a quiet recovery room with soft bedding, clean water, and the first safe silence she had known in a long time. Elsie Whitcomb, 13 years old and still wearing the same oversized coat from the night before, stood beside the recovery room window. Her grandmother, Mrs. Mabel Whitcomb, a 72-year-old retired seamstress who had stopped pretending she was not worried hours ago, stood behind her with both hands folded around a paper cup of tea. "She needs a name," Elsie said softly. Mabel looked at the mother dog through the glass. "Something strong." Elsie thought for a moment. "Mara." Alden glanced at her. "It sounds like someone who survived a storm," Elsie said. No one argued. From then on, Finch's mother was Mara. That evening, Marin called Alden into her office. Finch was asleep in a small padded crate nearby, and Mara was resting in the recovery room. On Marin's desk lay Finch's collar, Alden's leather bracelet, and 2 old pieces of dog equipment recovered from Dale's storage boxes. "I can't prove every part of this yet," Marin said, "but I can tell you what I see." Alden sat across from her. He had not slept much, and his hands felt older than they had the day before. Marin pointed to Finch's collar. This was cut from old working leather, not a puppy collar. The markings are worn, but they match the style used in older canine supply lots. Then she pointed to one of the recovered straps. This came from Dale's box. Same leather type, same stitching, same aging pattern. Alden touched the bracelet on his wrist. It had been made from Briggs's collar, the last thing he had kept from his former canine partner. Briggs had been more than a dog. He had been Alden's courage when Alden had none left to spare. Marin's voice softened. Some of that equipment came from the same kind of surplus lots your old unit used, maybe even from nearby departments. That scent on Finch's collar may have been close enough to what was on your bracelet that he recognized it as familiar. Alden looked toward the sleeping puppy. So he didn't recognize Briggs, he said. No, Marin answered gently, not like that. The truth hurt, but not in the way Alden expected. A small, foolish part of him had wanted the world to be kinder than it was. He had wanted some impossible sign that Briggs had returned, that grief could fold back on itself and hand him what he had lost. But Briggs was gone. Nothing would change that. No puppy could undo a grave. No scent could make time walk backward. Still, Finch had stepped toward him because of that bracelet, because something Briggs had left behind had smelled like safety. The old love had not returned in the same body, but it had opened a door. That was not a miracle made for headlines. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of miracle that could sit unnoticed on a man's wrist for years, waiting until a lost puppy needed it. Over the next few days, Finch stayed at the clinic to be near Mara. Every morning, Alden came by before work. Every afternoon, Elsie arrived after school. Finch greeted Alden with clumsy joy, paws slipping, tail beating against the floor. Then, almost immediately, he ran back to Mara and curled beside her front legs. At first, Alden felt a small ache each time it happened. He knew it was not fair. Finch had waited for his mother under a bridge for a week. Of course he needed her. Of course he belonged beside her. But Alden had grown used to the sound of tiny paws in his house, to the blanket near the door, to the solemn little face beside his boots. Marin saw the look on his face one afternoon. You know, she said, a dog's love is not a bowl that empties when someone else drinks from it. Alden looked at her. It is more like the creek under Mossback Bridge, she continued. It can run past more than one place and still remain itself. Alden watched Finch press his face into Mara's neck, then glanced back to make sure Alden was still there. For the first time, the ache loosened. Elsie's parents came to Cedar Hollow 2 days later. Her mother, Claire Whitcomb, was 38, a school office assistant who looked exhausted from worry and travel. Her father, Daniel Whitcomb, was 40, a mechanic who carried guilt in the careful way he spoke to his daughter. They had been living apart while trying to settle problems that had quietly spilled into Elsie's life. They came expecting to comfort her. Instead, they found her helping Marin fold towels, refill water bowls, and speak softly to rescued dogs that flinched at sudden movement. They saw Finch lean against her knee. They saw Mabel watching her granddaughter with pride too large to hide behind complaint. Claire began to cry first. Daniel stood beside her, silent, then knelt in front of Elsie. We should have listened better, he said. Elsie did not answer right away. Then she nodded, small but certain. It was not a perfect repair. Families did not heal in one sentence. But it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered. That night, Finch slept in the clinic between 2 towels. One carried Mara's scent. The other was the old towel Elsie had once placed under Mossback Bridge. Alden stood outside the recovery room and watched him breathe. Finch no longer looked like a lost thing. He looked tired, safe, and loved from 2 directions. Alden touched the leather bracelet on his wrist. For the first time in years, he did not ask why Briggs had been taken from him. He did not ask why love had to arrive so often through loss, or why healing sometimes came wearing the face of something small and frightened. He only stood there, listening to Finch's quiet breathing, and thanked Briggs for leaving behind enough love to be recognized, not returned, not replaced, recognized, and somehow that was enough. Spring came slowly to Cedar Hollow, not as a grand arrival, but as a quiet forgiveness. The hard edges of winter softened, first along the creek banks, where brown grass turned green in patches, and the trees near Mossback Bridge began to show small, bright leaves. The road that had once shone black with rain now held warm dust by afternoon. Even the old bridge seemed changed, though its stones were the same. Moss still clung to its sides. Water still moved beneath it, but the place no longer felt like it was holding its breath. Several months had passed since the night Finch found his mother behind the wooden door on Dale Rusk's property. The rescued dogs had been placed in foster homes, shelters, and a few carefully chosen families around the county. Some healed quickly. Others needed more time, more patience, and quieter rooms. Dr. Marin Bellamy, the 39-year-old veterinarian who had carried much of the rescue on her tired shoulders, kept track of every one of them. She said healing was not a straight road. Some animals ran toward it, some crawled, some had to be invited every day. Mara, Finch's mother, was one of the slow ones at first. She had arrived at the clinic thin, weak, and watchful, with the kind of exhaustion that sleep alone could not fix. But under Marin's care, she gained weight. Her coat grew brighter, her eyes cleared. She learned that hands could bring food, not fear. She learned that doors could open without taking something away. Because Mara needed space, Marin found her a home with the Hensleys, a kind couple in their 60s who owned a small farm outside Cedar Hollow. Ruth Hensley, 64, was a retired school librarian with a gentle voice. Her husband, Walter Hensley, 67, was a former dairy farmer who moved slowly but treated animals like neighbors. Their farm had strong fences, open pasture, a warm barn, and a sunny porch where an old dog could lie without being asked for anything except to rest. Alden Mercer signed Finch's adoption papers 2 weeks after the rescue, though everyone in town knew the decision had been made long before ink touched the page. Finch had grown since the bridge. His ears had begun to stand, though one still leaned slightly when he was tired. His legs were longer, his eyes brighter, and his paws remained too large in a way that promised more dog was still coming. Alden's house was no longer the silent place it had been. It had paw prints near the back door, a water bowl that never stayed where it was placed, and one work boot that Finch carried from room to room as if it were a relic from some ancient kingdom. Alden had tried putting the boot in the closet. Finch learned to wait outside the closet. Alden had tried giving him a toy instead. Finch accepted the toy, then took the boot anyway. In the end, Alden surrendered with the dignity of a man defeated by 13 pounds of loyalty and poor judgment. Elsie Whitcomb changed too. She was still 13, still quiet in certain rooms, but no longer invisible inside herself. With help from her grandmother, Mrs. Mabel Whitcomb, the 72-year-old retired seamstress who had once claimed she did not like dogs in the house, Elsie started a small volunteer group for abandoned animals around Cedar Hollow. They placed food boxes near the clinic, collected old towels, shared adoption notices, and helped Marin connect people with rescue resources. Mabel complained through most of it. She complained about muddy blankets, late phone calls, and the terrible manners of dogs who licked faces without written permission. Yet she washed every donated towel twice, folded them neatly, and labeled the storage bins in perfect handwriting. When anyone praised her, she said she was only doing it because no one else folded things correctly. Elsie's parents, Claire and Daniel Whitcomb, did not repair their family overnight. Claire, 38, a school office assistant, and Daniel, 40, a mechanic, still had difficult conversations ahead of them, but they had begun showing up differently. They asked Elsie what she thought. They listened when she answered. They joined her at one volunteer day, then another. It was not a fairy tale ending, but it was honest. Sometimes love did not fix everything at once. Sometimes it simply stopped walking away. The day Alden took Finch to visit Mara at the Hensley farm, the sky was clear and gold with late afternoon light. Elsie and Mabel came along because Elsie had asked, and Mabel had announced that someone needed to make sure all this emotional nonsense had supervision. Alden drove with Finch in the passenger seat. The young German shepherd stood with his front paws on the seat, nose lifted toward the open window, breathing in fields, cattle, damp earth, and spring. The moment they reached the farm, Finch knew. Before Alden could say his name, Finch began whining softly. His tail moved so hard his whole body followed. Ruth Hensley opened the gate and smiled as Mara stepped out from the shade of the barn. For one breath, Finch froze. Then he ran. He crossed the grass in a blur of black and tan, awkward legs flying, ears bouncing, heart leading the rest of him. Mara lowered her head just before he reached her. Finch crashed gently into her chest, then folded beneath her neck, as if trying to become small enough to fit back into the first safe place he had ever known. Mara licked his head slowly. This time, she did not look weak. She stood firm in the sun, her coat warm and clean, her eyes soft. Finch rolled onto his back, pawed at her chin, then sprang up and ran in a circle around her, like a knight who had forgotten how serious reunions were supposed to be. Elsie laughed and wiped her eyes at the same time. He's so happy. He looks ridiculous, Mabel said, dabbing her own eye with a tissue. But yes, for nearly an hour, Finch stayed with Mara. He chased butterflies, tumbled in the grass, drank from a metal bowl, then ran back to his mother again and again, as if checking that she was still real. Alden watched from near the fence. He had prepared himself for this moment in a way he had not told anyone. If Finch wanted to stay with Mara, Alden would let him. Love, he had learned, was not proven by holding on. Sometimes it was proven by opening your hands. Then Alden called softly, "Finch?" The young dog turned. He looked at Mara, then at Alden. His tail slowed for one uncertain second. Alden felt his chest tighten and forced himself not to call again. Finch ran toward him. Halfway across the field, he stopped, spun around, and ran back to Mara. He touched his nose to her cheek. Then he turned again and raced toward Alden, crashing into his knees with full, clumsy joy. Elsie laughed through tears. "He has 2 homes now!" Alden knelt and held Finch against him. Across the field, Mara watched calmly, as if she understood. She had not lost her son. Finch had not lost his mother. Love had widened. That was all. On the way back to town, Alden stopped at Mossback Bridge. The sun was low, turning the creek gold between the stones. Elsie carried a small wooden sign she had painted herself. Alden helped her place it near the path beneath the bridge, where Finch had once slept in a cardboard box. The sign read, "If you see a life waiting, don't just pass by." Mabel stood with her arms folded. "Could use a second coat of paint," Elsie smiled. "Grandma, I'm just saying, miracles deserve proper weatherproofing." Finch walked beneath the bridge and sniffed the ground. For a moment, everyone grew quiet. Alden wondered if some part of him remembered the cold, the waiting, the road. Finch lowered his nose to the old place, breathed once, then lifted his head and walked back to Alden. Together they crossed the bridge. Alden touched the leather bracelet made from Briggs's collar. Briggs had not been replaced. Mara had not been forgotten. Finch no longer had to wait under stone and rain for someone to come back. The bridge had once been a place of separation. Now it marked the place where a former officer had stopped. A lonely girl had been heard, an old woman had let her kindness show, and a small puppy had led them all toward home. What stays with me most about this story is not only the puppy beneath the bridge, or even the rescue that followed. It is the quiet truth that sometimes love does not return to us in the same form we lost it. Alden never got Briggs back. Finch never forgot the mother he had been waiting for. Elsie could not fix her family overnight, but each of them found something powerful when they chose not to look away. This story reminds us that kindness does not always begin with a grand, heroic act. Sometimes it begins with a bowl of food under a bridge, an old towel placed in the cold, a man stopping his truck when everyone else keeps driving, or a frightened puppy brave enough to trust again. And maybe that is the message we should carry with us. When we see a life waiting, hurting, or hoping quietly in the shadows, we should not simply pass by. One small act of care can become the bridge that leads someone home. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts. What part of Finch and Alden's story touched your heart the most? Do you believe animals can come into our lives at exactly the moment we need them most? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words mean a lot, and they help this community grow. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who loves meaningful animal stories, and subscribing to support the next videos on this channel. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here, and I'll see you again in the next story.